All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, I caught a story out of Los Angeles, California, where a so-called black man who happens to be a music teacher at one of these high schools, I believe, or maybe it was a junior high school in LA, he was being constantly lambasted by one of the students. The student decided that he was going to up the ante by resorting to quote-unquote racist name-calling. And of course, the so-called black man, he spazzed out and he mollywopped the student. And I call this situation very unfortunate because to me it's indicative of the lack of control within the home that we see with many of these children today, because so many of the parents want to be children as opposed to adults. And now these teachers, and I certainly could not be a teacher at all. I know my limitations. I don't have the patience, and I don't like to have to count on other people to do right by their children. Most of these people today are allowing their children to be raised by the television. So therefore you have a lot of anarchy in these schools. And I mean, don't get it twisted. There was a lot of anarchy in school when I was going to school. So I'm sure that even now, years later, where the students have been inundated with ideologies promoting homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism, and feminism, Lord knows what many of these teachers have to go through. But this brother here, he happened to snap because the student that he was dealing with was overly disrespectful. But I want you guys to pay very close attention to the reaction and the response of Miss Gayle King, because I thought that it was very indicative of the lack of regard that people have, particularly the so-called liberal black woman has, for the so-called black man and what he's expected to tolerate. And by no means am I advocating that people just spaz out every time that they're called a name. But we have no idea how long this person, this teacher, was subjected to being verbally harassed by the student. And everybody has a breaking point. And I've touched on this sentiment on this channel in the past. We live in a troll society. Everybody wants to try to provoke everyone else. They think that that's something that's amusing. And I believe that a lot of the troll aspect of this society is based off of the culturalist aspect of this society, because in strong cultures, we're taught to respect certain people who are there to empower us and inform us, teachers being one of them. Now, of course, we know we can go into the debate over whether or not the education system is actually something that's empowering us as so-called black men or so-called black people. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But the brother's a music teacher. It's his job to instruct the students on how to play instruments and the history of music, so on and so forth. So I'm not quite sure how that level of antipathy could have developed between him and that student, other than the fact that there's just an overt amount of disrespect in this society, just for men in general, but for the so-called black man in particular. But once again, I want you guys to pay very close attention to the response of Miss Gayle King, because to me, it elucidates why there are so many issues in this society between men and women. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
CBS Los Angeles station KCBS reports some students at an LA area high school are defending a teacher charged with child abuse after a classroom brawl. 64-year-old music teacher Marston Riley was caught on camera striking a student Friday.
Hey, Marston hitting him with the mollywops. Come here, sucker.
Friday, before the two traded punches. Well, witnesses say the student had used racial slurs and cursed at Riley after he was asked to leave because he wasn't wearing a proper uniform. Students suffered moderate injuries. Some students say the teenager was out of line. Now, it's worth going online to see the whole exchange.
Look like he beating him with a shoe. You know what? This is very unfortunate, even though I'm laughing because it's funny to me, to be quite honest with you. All across the world, and they're going to call this quote-unquote child abuse, but all across the world in other cultures, students get their ass whooped by their teacher for far less than cursing their teacher out and calling them racial slurs. If you ever see any depictions or any videos of the school system in India or Pakistan or any of the Middle Eastern countries, so on and so forth, if the student is late to school, they might get berated verbally by the teacher and hit upside the head. So this is nothing right here. But this reminds me of the scripture in Isaiah 3:12, where it tells us that children are our oppressors and women rule over us. Those that lead us cause us to error. They destroy the ways of our paths. In other words, what? Whenever you put women and children in prominent positions of leadership, it's going to cause confusion. we're not going to understand proper direction. Now, of course, on another level, Isaiah 3:12 is, when it says children are our oppressors, is also talking about a whole other force, because that's partly literal and partly metaphorical. But in this society that we live in, they exalt the child over the man. They exalt the woman over the man. Why is that? Because they're moving after the spirit of the mother goddess. All right. Like in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter and the 2nd verse, it tells us about the prince of the power of the air. That's talking about Bacchus. Right. Because the mother of Bacchus was the goddess of the air. She was known as Semele, but also she was known as Juno. Juno is the goddess of the air. She's represented by the dove. All right. So point being is this, to make a long story short, in this society, they're always going to exalt the empowerment of the woman and the child. And let's not get it twisted. It's not okay to beat up a child. All right. But it is okay for you to defend yourself. And people have to understand that when someone decides that they want to infract upon your dignity and your respect, you are going to initiate a response that you might not like. Scripture tells you in Proverbs 18:6, a fool's lips enter into contention and his mouth calleth for strokes. So in other words, what? When somebody keeps trying to argue with another person and get disrespectful for no legitimate reason whatsoever, that can precipitate an ass whooping. That's really what that's talking about. When we read the Gospel of John, the 2nd chapter, didn't Christ spaz out on the money changers? Point being is this, let's be respectful. Because when we're respectful in life, that's going to have a trickle-down effect on the respect that we receive from others. And once again, I'm not advocating for brothers to be wantonly violent. We should be trying to avoid violence at all costs. But this situation right here is an end sample of the level of disrespect that this brother probably has to put up with every day, and he snapped and he got tired of it.
Exchange. It's clear this student was mouthing off at him, but there has got to be a better way for a teacher to handle something like that. I don't get that.
Well, we know that you don't get it, Gayle King, because you don't want to get it. I mean, let's be for real. Gayle King is a 60-plus-year-old liberal black female. I guarantee you that had the teacher been a so-called black female, and that black female teacher had a student in the class that was calling her a nigger bitch, and the black woman went to the back of the class and slapped fire out of that student, I promise you, Gayle King would have had a totally different response. That's why I tell you brothers out there that there's a lot of nuance to what goes on in this society. Everything is not just about race. The so-called black man is getting his head pumped up with all of these misunderstandings about the conundrum that he's in, to where we're made to believe that certain factions are our allies when they're not. I tell brothers this all the time. The vast majority of these black women are liberal. And the liberal black woman is always going to take the side of the feminist angle before the so-called racialist angle. Gayle King has no understanding about the respect for manhood. So, of course, that's the first thing that she's going to say. And, I mean, look, on a surface level, we would like to have had the brother go to, a higher authority and have had something done about the student. But once again, when you're dealing with constantly being verbally assaulted or what have you, you're going to put yourself in the position, or the person who decides to verbally assault someone is going to put themselves in the position where, who knows, that person might snap. You never know what's going on in somebody else's life when you decide to be wantonly offensive. And, sometimes these guys, they come from the old school. That's why I'm saying Gayle King, she come from the old school too. I'm sure that she's grown up seeing kids get their ass whooped. Back in her day, kids could get their ass whooped by the next door neighbor, and the parents wouldn't say anything about it if the kid was being bad. So for Gayle King to act totally incredulous about what's going on, that just shows you that underneath that surface layer of her trying to act incensed or trying to act as if there was a better way, she's really trying to say, so-called black man, you don't have the right to be upset about anything. You don't have the right to stand up for yourself in any way. Because I promise you that had that been a black female teacher, her tact would have been completely different. Or even a white female teacher. That's why I tell you brothers all the time, the liberal black woman views herself as her own demographic. And they only take the racialist angle when it suits them. That's it. Now, when you pay attention, look at her 3 Caucasian colleagues. None of them have a real response or reaction to what Gayle King is saying, because they understand that the subtext of the story is that the black male teacher was getting verbally assaulted with racist rhetoric. So their attitude is, you know what, Gayle King, you can go out there on that branch on your own. You're the black woman here. So if you're the one who wants to decide that that man had no reason to be upset, that's on you. But we're going to stay out of it. Look at their responses.
It scares me because I think we've become so desensitized that we think, that kind of behavior is okay.
Yeah, we've become so desensitized, Gayle King, because people are so more violent today towards children than they were when you were a child. You're so full of shit. You know damn well when you were growing up back in the late 50s and 60s that you had people in your community that was whooping their child's ass, had children going outside into the backyard and getting switches and getting their asses whooped. And am I saying that that was a good thing or a proper thing or a great thing? I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that for Gayle King to act like she's unfamiliar with corporal punishment of a child for far less things than being as verbally offensive as that child was to that teacher, she's being disingenuous. All right. That's how you know she has an agenda to try to promote the so-called black man always having to deal with people's bullshit. And I tell you brothers this all the time. In this society, they view the so-called black man as a toilet. You're just supposed to put up with people's shit. Now, I'm always going to be an exponent of us finding a higher way to operate within this society and to deal with a lot of these elements. But once again, when you decide that you're going to verbally harass someone, you never know how they're going to respond. It's not up to you to decide how someone's going to respond towards you when your intention is to provoke them.
It is not okay.
But you know what? Let's rewind this back. I just want to see this one more time.
CBS Los Angeles station KCBS reports some students at an LA area high school are defending a teacher charged with child abuse after a classroom brawl. 64-year-old music teacher Marston Riley was caught on camera striking a student Friday before the two traded punches. Well, witnesses say the student had used racial slurs and cursed at Riley after he was asked to leave because he wasn't wearing a proper uniform. The student suffered moderate injuries. Some students say the teenager was out of line.
For the students to state that the teenager was out of line, that shows you how gross the neglect was in regards to the situation that probably had been going on in the classroom for an elongated period of time. And let me say this, maybe the brother was tolerating too much shit. And that's why I state all the time, a lot of you brothers, you tolerate too much shit, man. You got to nip it in the bud early. Maybe the first time that the student came out of his mouth, the teacher should have reported him to a higher authority. But, you know, a lot of times these higher authorities, they poo-poo everything until people just snap. It's unfortunate. That's why, once again, we have to know a lot of the background parameters to what went on here. But just to make a long story short, the moral of the story to me is when you decide to be overly disrespectful towards others, you cannot control how they're going to react or how they're going to respond.
Now, it's worth going online to see the whole exchange. It's clear this student was mouthing off at him, but there has got to be a better way for a teacher to handle something like that. I don't get that. It scares me because I think we've become so desensitized that we think, that kind of behavior is okay.
Yeah, whatever, Gayle King. Maybe it's hard for it to permeate into your skull how it happened because you got that damn wig on top of your head. Take that wig off so that some, certain elements, some energies can permeate through that skull of yours, and then maybe you can grasp it a little better. Once again, I promise you that had that been a black female teacher, her take on this situation would have been completely and totally different. I have no doubt about it in my mind. Okay, so now this is going to be the continuation of the storyline involving Mr. Marston Riley, the so-called black man who's a teacher based in California. He was not only verbally abused and harassed by one of his students, he was called so-called racial slurs, and he also was affronted by the student to the level where the student stepped to him physically and threatened him physically. And eventually he snapped, as most people do. Now, am I saying that he went about it the right way as people would have liked him to go about it? No, not necessarily. But at the end of the day, there is going to come a breaking point in this society because the normal ordinances that are supposed to be implored are no longer implored. They want the woman over the man. They want the child over the man. They want the homosexual over the quote-unquote straight person or quote-unquote heterosexual. And when you try to turn things topsy-turvy, inside out, people are going to bend for a while, but eventually they're going to snap back. But once again, you guys, pay very close attention to Miss Gayle King and how she responds because it's consistent with the lack of respect of the masculine principle that we see here in this society, in Western society, in this Babylonian society that we live in, especially as a so-called black man from other demographics that are in a position of power, quote unquote, over the so-called black man. And that's why I always state, brothers should not be in corporate America if you can avoid it. If you can avoid it, you should try to avoid these corporate America jobs. And I give all due credit to modern day teachers, because based off of what I see on the internet, especially on a lot of these video sharing websites like WorldStar, etc., how these teachers are confronted by students every day, disrespected by students every day. I don't know how they deal with it. But the schools that I was sent to, you were not even allowed to contemplate things like that. So anyway, let's see what goes on here.
Donations are pouring in for a Los Angeles teacher seen on video fighting a 14-year-old student. Footage captured 64-year-old Marston Riley repeat.
Yo, Marston Riley hooked off, boy. My man wasn't playing. My man threw the mollywop from hell. You looped your shot, Marston. You got to throw it straight right. That would have caught him.
Repeatedly punching the band student in class last week after the student threw a basketball at him and called...
Oh, he got a knockdown right there. He didn't even give little man an 8 count.
Called him several racist names, including the N-word. Riley was later arrested.
Well, we know Marston Riley's just supposed to tolerate that. He's supposed to tolerate getting called all type of names, getting called the so-called N-word every day. Now, once again, I don't know how long this went on. This might be partially Marston Riley's fault. Why do I say that? Because when people show you certain characteristics, you have to nip it in the bud. He should have gotten this quote-unquote student kicked out of his class if he could have. But once again, in this society, people oftentimes do not know when enough is enough. They don't know when to stop until things escalate to a level where they try to act like they had no idea it was going to go. Whenever you provoke people, whatever you get in response after they tell you to stop and you continue on is what you deserve. However extreme it is what you have coming to you. It's very unfortunate. Now, Mr. Marston Riley, hopefully he'll be able to bounce back from this. And hopefully also, when he sees situations like this starting to build up, he'll cut it off at the pass as opposed to trying to be patient. Sometimes we're too patient with people who are overly confrontational or who seem to try to feed off of altercations. As soon as we see somebody like that, we have to head them off at the pass and cut them off right away.
Later arrested for suspicion of child abuse, the student was treated for minor injuries. A GoFundMe page has raised more than $160,000 for Riley, who says he's grateful.
Now look at this. This is another sign of how society is starting to snap back, especially pertaining to many of these Luciferian ideologies that are being pushed on the people, on the demographic that is supposed to be in control, that being the adults. This person has been given $161,000 plus. And people have basically just seen him in a video where he whooped a child's ass. That shows you that so many adults are getting tired of the level of disrespect that they're being forced to endure from a lot of these children. And it's not even just about the children who are allowed to talk and speak and threaten adults however they want. There are other demographics who are becoming bolder and bolder, especially towards men. And if they don't watch themselves, they're going to find themselves becoming more and more involved in altercations like this as well, where they try to swell up on a grown man, walk up on a grown man, and he's not going to talk shit out with you. He's just going to hook off on you. That's how it's going to go.
This is Marston Riley, and I'm letting you know that this GoFundMe page is legit. I want to thank Cecilia Diaz for setting it up for me, and I want to thank you for supporting me.
You know what, brother? I hope everything works out for you. I'm going to check out your GoFundMe page, man. I'm going to check that shit out. Might even message you. Maybe you could hook me up with some guitar lessons or something. I see you got that guitar in the background. Just don't try to hook off on me, please, brother.
You are a blessing. Thank you.
Riley has since been released on bond. His arraignment is scheduled for November 30th.
I don't know, Mr. Riley, but I look at that video, and I know there are two sides to every story, but I don't get it.
Of course you don't get it, Gail King. Nobody's surprised by this. I already know that you don't get it. You know, a lot of times brothers come in the comments, oh, why you always getting on Gail King? I don't get on Gail King. I get on idiocy. At one point in time, I address all these buffoons on a panel. I use these news stories as backdrops, but I don't respect any of these anchors. They're nothing but shills and puppets. That's all they are. And their job is to try to push and propagate a certain energy onto the masses. I told you guys when that whole Me Too thing started that eventually all these newscasts would highlight women anchors because they want you to view the woman as a dispensary for information and truth and things of that nature. And look, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're interacting with your wife. But it's no disrespect. The woman is a product of her emotions. That's what they are. And that's what we see right here. Gayle King is unable to evaluate exactly what happened because she has no empathy for Mr. Marston Riley, because whenever she looks at Mr. Marston Riley, all she sees is a man who's in power. And she does not like to have a man in power, especially a so-called black man. So in her view, he was supposed to tolerate whatever he's been tolerating for as long as he's been tolerating it from that boy. And she does not understand how there's a reverberation if you allow that dynamic to persist. Gayle King is the same type of liberal female, specifically liberal black female, who will tell adult men what they should not be able to do and what they should be willing to tolerate. And then when the children get out of control, she'll look around and say, wow, where are all the strong men to put these children in their place? This is why, once again, brothers, the woman is not supposed to be involved in anything involving legislation or standards of society, because they lead with their emotions and they're not critical thinkers on the level of a three-dimensional thought process. They're just not. Are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. But for the most part, the woman views things through the prism of her feelings, and she's not going to be able to move beyond that. There's a reason why Marston Riley did what he did. And maybe they should have an interview with Marston Riley. I'm sure that they can contact him as well as the boy and get to the bottom of exactly what happened. Because who knows, maybe the boy is troubled in his home life. Maybe there's no male figure in his home life. A lot of these young boys are growing up around women, and they're the recipients of all that negative matriarchal energy. They bring that into the school system. They've never been around an older male that they've had to respect. They lash out at him, and the man is supposed to tolerate it. And the cycle continues because they're not getting at the source, that being all that corrosive matriarchal energy in the household. And this is why people like Gayle King and Nora O'Donnell and Bianna Gola Rodriguez, whatever the hell her name is, and this clown in the middle that they have replacing Charlie Rose, they're not fit to evaluate what's going on in this society, because everything with them is to just move forward with how they feel about things according to these Luciferian ideologies and these Babylonian principles. Child over the adult, woman over the man, homosexual over the heterosexual.
I don't get why he's getting the outpouring of support for his behavior there.
Now, did you guys hear that? Gayle King does not understand why he's getting support. So it's not even that she's upset about what he did. She's also upset at the people who are supporting him, because she thinks that everybody thinks like her. That's what she thinks. And that's where so many of these super liberal people are going to be shocked and surprised when the snapback in society does take place, because people are getting tired of being told how they're supposed to think about things, especially when they understand what's going to be the effect of embracing a lot of these confused ideologies and tenets. Let me rewind this back just a little bit.
Know that this GoFundMe page is legit. I want to thank Cecilia Diaz for setting it up for me, and I want to thank you for supporting me. You are a blessing. Thank you.
Riley has since been released on bond. His arraignment is scheduled for November 30th.
And she probably started the GoFundMe so that he could bail himself out of jail, because the other teachers probably have to deal with the same type of shit, and they understood why he finally snapped. You know, once again, people have so much empathy for the trials and travails of these other groups and demographics. I guarantee you, had Mr. Marston Riley been a female, had he been Marsha Riley, and she snapped at a student and she said, the reason why I snapped is because I'm a black woman and he called me a nigger bitch, I promise you Gayle King would have understood why Marsha Riley did what she did.
I don't know, Mr. Riley, but I look at that video, and I know there are two sides to every story, but
you don't care.
But I don't get it. I don't get why he's getting the outpouring of support for his behavior there.
That's a shame that you're supposed to be an anchor woman who's communicating certain information to the world, to the nation, and you don't understand why society will be reacting how they are to this story. That means that you're woefully out of touch with what's going on in the real world, Gayle King. Maybe if you took that crazy ass wig off your damn head, you'd be able to receive some energy into that thick ass skull of yours.
I think you're the adult in the room. There should have been other ways to handle that, regardless of what this kid did or what the kid said. I don't understand that.
Especially because the fighting continued.
Exactly.
I'm not even saying that any of these people should necessarily agree with what he did, but to say you don't understand why it happened, that's foolishness. That's why I stated throughout the video that Mr. Marston Riley is partially at fault. Because you have to nip certain things like this in the bud. Don't think that it's a sign of manhood to tolerate disrespect, because it's not. So many men today are taught, you know what, just be tough and just deal with it. No, you're a man. You have the right to be respected. This society will tell you different, but you do have the right to be respected. And the woman is not going to care about your respect for the most part, because most of these broads are still angry and bitter about a bad relationship from when they were 22 years old. On television, 42, 52, 62 years old, still mad about what happened in a relationship back in college. So they're going to take it out on Mr. Marston Riley in a story like this. At the end of the day, Marston Riley has to understand that he has to respect his own manhood. As soon as a student comes out of pocket like that, you have to report it to whoever. The principal, the vice principal, whoever. And let them know, you got to get this kid out of my class. Because if not, I don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly. I'm missing something.
Yeah, we know what you're missing, Gail King. You're missing some brain cells. You're missing a man.
No, you're not the only one. Well, voters and the...
But anyway, that's basically it on that. Hopefully things turn out well for Mr. Marston Riley. So peace.